Posted by you/tweak. Gang. Serious, people of Reddit, what is the one thing that was so disturbing and gruesome you saw in your life that still disturbs you deeply to this day? Hear a neighbor screaming for help. Go outside like the fuck my neighbor's doing now. She's hysterical and I run over and see what's happening. She's nonsensical and leads me to the basement all the while making this fucking wailing wheezing sound. Her son lay blue-faced on the ground. Paramedics arrived shortly and tried to resuscitate him because his feet were warm to the touch and it would have been fairly recently he had killed himself. He did not make it. Neighbor had found her son in the basement hanging from the recently deceased family dog's leash. She tried to lift him in a futile effort as if he was going to pull himself up or start breathing again. After she tried to do this and realized that she needed to cut him down, she grabbed a knife and cut him down. As she cut him down, she couldn't brace his dead weight and he smashed his head on the way down, and she was very concerned by this. It wasn't the young man's face or circumstances of the death, it was that fucking noise that woman made going down the stairs. Still hear that shit sometimes. I'm a funeral director and I've got two cases I think about a lot. The first was a Russian man who shot himself. He entered the yard in a poncho, sat on a chair and shot himself in the heart. Russians always do open caskets, so he was preserving his face, but he didn't realize I need an intact heart to embalm, but that's not what sticks with me. When we unwrapped him, he had a big fat smile plastered on his face. It was like staring into the void and the void smiling calmly back at you. He was completely at ease with his decision. The second is who I affectionately refer to as River Man. He had been there for 2 weeks. The smell was indescribable. He was falling apart. Blue, green and black. You can't just convince yourself everything's fine. There's this innate biological response to working with decay like that, and all day my body was in fight or flight mode. His wife insisted on viewing him. We cautioned her, we showed her photos, we asked the medical examiner to caution her, but she could not be dissuaded. She spent 15 fucking minutes in a tiny room alone with him. I pulled my 4 days dead brother out of the closet he hung himself in. The way his eyes and tongue were bulging out of his head and the green/purple color of his skin still haunt my dreams to this day. My greatest failure was not realizing my little brother was hurting that bad. I still hate myself for it. I know it's not my fault, I just miss my little brother. I had a life-changing experience on Monday. We have 2 dogs that have been in our lives since they were both puppies. I was running errands for less than 2 hours, and I came home to 2 wagging tails. I noticed instantly though that they were both covered in blood, white fur. As soon as they came out of the door, I saw our family cat lifeless on the floor. They've both always lived with cats. And this indoor kitty had been a family member for quite some time. I don't think I'll ever understand it. Instinct is always there, they're still animals despite being domesticated. I had to shampoo the rugs and even wipe down the walls. This was not an accident, our cat was mauled. I'm pretty sure I'll never forget that. I couldn't eat or sleep for the last couple days. In Afghan, we'd been getting dogged by some Taliban for like 4 days. They'd pop up out of cover, mag dump, and run. We'd taken a casualty to an Eid and lost several vehicles trying to hunt them down. We finally caught them in a courtyard in a little pregame huddle. About 6 of them holding AKs and RPGs kinda strategizing. We were about 800 yards away and they didn't know we could see them, so we called in an airstrike. We saw the blast, and advanced on the position. We were high-fiving, back-slapping and generally in high spirits because we'd finally got him. Except one of them wasn't dead. He was missing both legs, his guts were hanging out, he was badly burned. He dragged himself to where I was standing in shock, laid his head on my boots, and began to weep. I speak enough Pashto to understand he wanted his mom. Up until then they were just targets, contacts or fucking hajis. This was just a kid barely out of his teens who wanted his mommy. It took him 15 minutes to die. We logged 6 enemy Kia and said nothing as we returned to our patrol base. After that the guys in the platoon were a lot more reserved. The raucous macho backslapping hua shit was gone. 2 men present at that event have committed suicide, 3 are hopelessly lost in substance abuse, and the rest of us got a lot more quiet. I still have nightmares about it and kinda choke up even just thinking about it, which happens unbidden about 2 or 3 times a week. Warning, long post, TL, DR bad 911 medical call with poor outcome. Well, here goes. I'm a paramedic in southern rural US. When I was new into the field we were dispatched to a call for shortness of breath for an elderly woman. We arrived on scene to find a gaggle of family members and several local PD. The medic I was working with at the time was helping me learn and mentoring me through paramedic school. He told me, "This is your call, I'll do whatever you need me to, but this is all you. We enter the residence to find Grandma laid out on the couch in obvious distress. We move family out of the way and I say, "Hello ma'am, my name is Moose Root, are you having trouble breathing?" She gives me this look of absolute fear. That same look you've seen in pictures of people moments before death. Lo and behold, 3 to 8 seconds later goes unresponsive. We emergency move her to the stretcher, get to the ambulance and begin intubation. A sheriff on scene agrees to drive us to the hospital. Little did we know he was a family member. I tear her clothes off and begin CPR. The driver, sheriff, throws us across the cabin at every turn in his panic. Lose our intubation tools with every curve in the road. Set up, 1 or 2 compressions get thrown across the cab. Rinse and repeat. We arrive at the ER. She has a N title of 5, which means all the drugs and CPR we did isn't worthwhile because she's very dead. This didn't bug me initially. Breaking ribs during CPR, drilling into her bone for fluid/drugs, old lady titties didn't bug me. But sometimes I still see that look on her face in her last second of life. That primal fear of impending doom. She went into cardiac arrest in the best possible scenario, witnessed by 2 healthcare providers and still died. When it's your time, I guess. This was my first honest run-in with stress that stayed with me in my career. There has been several other incidents of varying degree, but this poor woman's agony and desperation was my great introduction to my lifelong friend PTSD. A funny note, when we returned to the station, medic asked me, "What did you say to her?" To which I replied, "Ma'am, are you having trouble breathing?" Yep, last thought in her head before she died was, "What a stupid fucking question." I used to copy file notes for inmates and deliver them to the prison when their cases were updated. I had to go through folders for each inmate, often seeing letters from victims, family members begging for their release, and reasons why they were incarcerated. The really bad ones were flagged with sensitive material labels, like the aftermath of abuse photos and worse. Was carrying a particularly large stack of these folders to a parole officer's desk one day. They got away from me and started to shift when I dropped them. One of them spilled photos of child pornography, and I saw way too much of them. It turned my stomach so badly, I had to leave that job. At roughly the age of 21, one of my friends endured his mother shooting his philandering father in the head with a shotgun in their kitchen. Literally blew his head off. Once the cops were done with the investigation, my friend and his sister, 16, were effectively on their own with their father dead and their mother in jail. Within a few days of the murder, he called me and one other friend and asked us if we could go and clean up their house. They hadn't been in it since the murder and there was no way they could be the ones to clean it up. My friend and I agreed because that's what friends are for. We arrived with cleaning materials and lots of rubber gloves. What we found was a nightmare with dried blood, bone, skin, brain and everything else blasted all throughout the kitchen. She used buckshot, which had lots of pellets that went everywhere. Brain matter was in the ceiling. We saw that some of the cabinets had holes in them, and upon opening them we saw that the pellets carried blood, bone and brain into the various items that were in the cabinets. Crackers had blood on them, peanut butter had bones. The ceiling was the hardest as so much of the brain went into the ceiling and we had to try to clean it over our heads. We cleaned and scrubbed that kitchen for hours and went through gallons of bleach and bloody water. At one point we thought we were mostly done, but we saw some holes in the kitchen wall and went into the living room to see that some pellets had gone through and carried blood and brains into a couch. After pulling the couch all the way from the wall, we saw more cleaning needed in that room. The whole process took us maybe 8 hours and I don't think we spoke more than a few sentences to each other while cleaning up their house. It's been 30 plus years since I did this, but I know I'll never forget what I saw there. FYI, the wife was deemed temporarily insane and never spent any time in prison. A toddler getting hit by a car. The little girl took off across the yard headed towards the street and the mom was too far away to catch her before she ran right in front of the car that was in front of us. My dad slammed on the brakes as soon as he saw her running and was screaming, "No, no, 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 no." But the car in front of us didn't see her. My dad pulled into the driveway across the street from the house and told us not to look out the back window. We could hear the horrific screams from the mom and the driver was absolutely hysterical. We had to stay there until the police arrived and it was just constant screaming. It is never talked about unless one of us, my dad and brothers, have a nightmare about it. I seemed to block it out for years until I became a parent, when it started becoming a reoccurring nightmare for the entire pregnancy. I've got 2 and they are both from elementary school. The first happened when the cool trend was to shake up a pop can and pierce the lid with a pin, then shotgun the Coke. One kid went to do it and lost his grip on the pin, which was blasted down his throat by the force of the pop flying out of the can. I remember being amazed by how much blood was pouring out of this kid's mouth. He went to hospital and recovered. The scene shows up in my stress dreams sometimes. The second was the next year, so I'm in grade 4. The schoolyard was surrounded by a chain link fence, maybe 5 feet tall, but being the 80s there was no caps on the points at the top. So a frisbee or ball or something got tossed over the fence and an older kid decided he was going to climb the fence to get it. Got to the top and his foot slipped and the fence went through under his eye and popped his eyeball out. Just a shocked kid standing there staring at his own eye still on the fence. No idea what happened to him since he was a few years older, and being a kid I never thought to follow up on it. Gotta imagine he lost the eye at the very least. Still get the heebie-jeebies 20 plus years later when I think of that one. When I was sitting on the bus after end of school, one of my friends from class got off his bike to pick a book up and he got hit by a passing car, and most of us on the bus saw it. The kid landed in the back of the truck. I saw it clear as day. He basically did a cartwheel in the air and landed in the bed of the truck as the driver stopped, also a student at my high school. We ran off the bus toward the truck, and I hate that I looked, but he was laying there dead with his eyes open and blood dripping out of his mouth, and both of his legs were basically broken sideways to one direction, and it was absolutely scarring. I have never forgotten exactly what that looked like. Kid was my age, only 13. Very sad day. Over the summer my boyfriend and I were driving somewhere and we witnessed a guy on a motorcycle get run over. He fell off his bike for some reason, we didn't see why, and we saw the woman in the car right behind him run over him. She was honestly riding too close to him. Maybe if she gave him more space she would have had time to stop. We pulled over to call the police, and I remember asking her if she was okay. She was hysterical, saying I killed him. I remember saying we don't know that, the ambulance is on the way. Boyfriend and I left once the police and medics arrived. It was on the nightly news later that day. The man didn't make it. He was mid-20s, around our age. I just remember him covered in blood and road rash. What a poor way to go. Please give motorcycles plenty of room when driving behind them. Things could have turned out differently if maybe she left more room for reaction time to stop. Room full of cats and kittens, some of them very tiny and newborn, with their throats all slit. Worked in animal control and went to location of a very well-known animal hoarder who was barred from owning animals due to prior abuse. Basically, she starved 6 dogs to death, got the call that she was hoarding animals again. Went to location and the woman was sitting on her porch. When asked about the cats she looks us straight in the eye and says, "I ain't got no cats, you can go look yourself ETA, we did get 2 live puppies, a pregnant cat and 4 cockatiels from the location, so there's that happy note." I was driving to work one morning and there was a car parked on the side of a bridge. Which is odd, so it made me look. I figured somebody broke down. As I drove by, I saw a man who had climbed over the rails and was leaning off. We made direct eye contact as I drove by. It took me a second to realize what I had seen. I turned around as fast as I could, but he had already jumped. I pulled over and ran to the side of the bridge and I could see his body all the way down at the bottom. About a 200-foot drop. I ran down to the end of the bridge and then ran down the hill to the bottom. When I got down there it was so eerie. I walked over to him and knelt down and checked his pulse. When I picked up his hand it was like picking up a warm bag of marbles. All the bones had broken. That was probably 20 years ago, but I can still remember how odd it was to be alone down there next to a broken body that used to be somebody. When the police came I had to wait in the police car to give my report of what I saw. The man's wife showed up at the bridge and was told of the news right in front of me. I had the unfortunate front row seat to see her break down and die inside. I can still remember the look on his face, and the look on hers. When I was 11 my dad and I were first on the scene of a 18-wheeler versus VW Golf head-on collision. All 4 people in the Golf died on impact. It was a mom, dad, a little girl about my age and another adult male. The car was so badly damaged that we couldn't get the people out of the car. My dad told me to walk away and not look, but I was just frozen. He eventually got the girl out of the car and it was terrible. She was in the back seat and I'm guessing during the impact the front seat had basically pushed her legs into her torso. One leg was just dangling by a piece of flesh and it looked like every bone in her body was broken. The part that really stuck with me was the truck driver. Obviously he was absolutely devastated and was just pacing around screaming and howling. I've never again seen a person so distraught and desperate. Even today 20 years later when I hear a man scream in a certain tone my whole body just tenses up. Also seeing my dad so flustered was really scary. To this day my dad and I never spoke about that day again. Maybe one day at the right moment I'll bring it up and ask him how he feels about the whole thing. Leaving work late one night many years ago I heard a car coming up the road. Though my view of the road was blocked, I could hear that the car was coming fast, then I heard it crash, and saw a fireball shoot above the trees. My hubby was there to pick me up, and we ran together toward the fire. We could see through the trees to find the car on the wrong side of the road, facing the wrong way against some trees, engulfed in flames. I could see the driver's side door moving, and told hubby that the driver had surely been thrown from the vehicle when it spun because I couldn't cope with the idea that he was still in there. So hubby ran in the direction of the rear of the car, I in the direction the car was facing, when I heard something that made me turn to look toward the passenger area. I saw a human shape, fully aflame, push open the door and try to get out. I completely lost it. The flames were far too hot and high for us to get even close to the car, and I was apparently screaming, though I have no memory of doing so, as hubby ran for me and tried to pull my head to his chest so I'd stop looking at the burning shape that, at that point, simply slumped out of the partially open door and burned. When the fire department arrived several minutes later, one of the firemen ran to us and asked if there was anyone in the vehicle. He couldn't discern the burning figure from the surrounding fire, and that was when I began to cry, completely shattered that he couldn't see the man hanging out the door. The driver was in a rental car, and his family filed a lawsuit that resulted in insurance people contacting and interviewing hubby and me some days after the event. During the interview I was trembling so violently that it was a struggle to speak clearly, and the interviewer ended the session and suggested I get medical help. The subsequent investigation confirmed that the driver had died on impact and did not burn to death, and any movement of the body we had seen was the likely result of latent nerve response to the flames. Knowing that never really lessened my horror over the event. This happened when I was 22, I'm now 58 and have not been able to watch movies about people involved in fire or relax around large, open fires since that day. This was a long time ago, and I could not remember the name of the video even if I wanted to, but once I saw a video taken by a group of soldiers in Afghanistan. It must have been from the 80s or 90s. They had captured a group of about 10 or 12 Russian soldiers, and had them all laying face down on the ground. The Russian guys were all various ages, but fairly young, the youngest of which must have been 18. They went about one by one slitting each of their throats. It wasn't just a quick thorough slice and on to the next either. They had a rusty blunt knife, and they just picked each of the people up one by the hair and hacked at their throat until they got about halfway through. Most of the people didn't die immediately, they just made this horrible screaming, wheezing, gurgling sound and gasped until they bled out. By the time they got to the last one, the last person was crying and screaming and clearly begging for his life with everything he had. They all stood around him, seemingly listening, and it looked like maybe even being convinced by his pleading. Out of nowhere, the one with the knife just starts hacking, and he starts gurgling and wheezing, but he somehow manages to get out of the person's grip, and tries to run away towards the mountains they are near. As he is running away, his head is hacked almost halfway through, and so it's flapping around as he's running. He gets about 200 or 300 feet away before he collapses, and you can see his chest still heaving. I will never forget the sounds of their blood gurgling in their throats. I saw a car accident. This Lambo flew by us going 120, maybe even more. And my friend's like, wow, what a bunch of fucking idiots. I'm like, yeah, but they live for that shit. Boom. Explosion in the distance. This car flew off the road and into the woods. It was dark out. I got out of my car to go see if I could find them and help them. I couldn't find their car. I am CPR certified, as if that matters at all in this situation. The tire marks ended and there was no car, which was just the scariest feeling. The car was above my head in the trees. Windshield smashed. Car cut in half. No bodies in the seats. They were scattered around me. The two of them were dead. Their bodies were like bags of garbage. Shattered bones, flat bodies, like their bones just were mush. One of them crashed into a tree and the other was just laying there on the ground. I thought that was bad. The worst part was their sister was following them a few miles back and she got out of the car screaming. I've never heard anyone cry so hard or scream so much. It was terrible. For months I acted like it didn't bother me because it kind of didn't. The part about them loving that, and dying happily doing what they loved most made me happy, but as the months went on, their bodies were just not out of my mind. It sucked and still does. And when I told the story to my therapist, he said it's fucked up that I could tell that story without any emotions. Edit, my therapist means concerning, not fucked up, but my parents died and my sister, and death is just something that's kind of normal to me, but the way they looked, that shouldn't be okay with anyone. And it's really fucked up.